The morning mist still clung to the canopy as officers Liam and Rachel moved silently along a narrow game trail deep in the forest west of a large inland lake. The scent of pine and damp earth filled the air, muffling the soft crunch of their boots and the steady, alert breathing of Bruno, their canine partner, a 5-year-old German shepherd trained for tracking and apprehension. They had been on the trail of a suspect wanted for aggravated assault, a man last seen fleeing into the backwoods before dawn. The terrain was rugged and isolated, with thick brush and uneven ground slowing their progress. Bruno had been leading confidently, nose low, tail alert, following scent particles invisible to the human eye. Liam, in his mid-30s and built solid from a decade of fieldwork, moved just behind, scanning the surroundings with his service weapon drawn but lowered. Rachel, leaner and more compact, followed in a crouch, her hand near her belt where bear spray and sidearm waited. She'd grown up nearby and knew how quickly the wilderness could turn. Neither of them expected the horror that would erupt in the next few seconds. Without warning, Bruno stopped dead, ears rigid, nostrils flaring. A heartbeat passed. Then he barked sharply, once, and all hell broke loose. From a thicket barely 10 feet away, a massive grizzly erupted through the brush like a freight train, jaws open and claws already swinging. It had likely been bedded down and startled awake by their approach. Its fur was a dusty brown, shoulders towering above Liam's head, and its roar filled the forest with a deafening growl of raw fury. Liam barely had time to fire a warning shot into the air, the sharp crack echoing through the trees. But the bear didn't flinch. It slammed into him full force, snapping branches and sending him flying into a tree trunk. His head struck hard, helmet cracking, body sliding to the ground with a thud, his weapon lost in the fall. Rachel reached for her bear spray, heart hammering, but the grizzly was already on her. One powerful swipe caught her left shoulder, shredding her vest, snapping straps, and sending her sprawling into the undergrowth. Torn fabric and shallow gashes lined her upper arm and side as she crashed through ferns and low saplings. The bear roared again and surged after her. That's when Bruno charged. The dog launched himself at the bear's rear leg, jaws locking around muscle and tendon above the ankle. The bear shrieked and twisted, trying to shake him off. Bruno held firm, biting deeper, his body swinging violently as the grizzly stomped and spun. Rachel, dazed and bleeding, pushed up onto one knee. Her head throbbed, vision swimming, but training took over. She raised her weapon with both hands, ignoring the pain in her side, and fired a single round into the bear's upper back. The gunshot cracked through the air. The bear bellowed again, its hind leg buckling as the bullet punched through flesh. It turned away from the dog and backed into the brush with a huffing growl, leaving clawed prints and a trail of blood. Branches snapped as it limped into the woods, panting, its eyes wild with pain and confusion. Rachel crawled to Bruno, who had collapsed onto his side, panting hard. Blood matted his flank. His breathing was shallow, one leg curled unnaturally beneath him. She pressed a hand to his side and felt the uneven rise of his chest, one rib clearly fractured. Liam groaned nearby, rolling onto his side with blood on his forehead and bark embedded in his gear. The entire attack had lasted less than 30 seconds. Their radios crackled. Voices from other units called in across the search perimeter. Rachel responded, voice steady but trembling, relaying their location and the events in clipped bursts. They wrapped Bruno in a makeshift sling made from a jacket and helped Liam to his feet. Together, they moved to a small clearing suitable for airlift. When backup arrived, bleeding had been controlled, and both officers were conscious, though shaken and bruised. The grizzly had vanished into dense forest, leaving claw marks in bark and fresh blood smears on the ground. Wildlife officers followed the trail for more than a mile before it disappeared into a ravine. No further trace was found that day. The suspect they'd been tracking was located hours later, hiding in a makeshift tree stand barely 100 yards from the attack site. He had witnessed the entire encounter, frozen and silent. When officers retrieved him, his face was pale, and he seemed visibly shaken by what he'd seen. Liam was diagnosed with a concussion and fractured ribs. Rachel's wounds required dozens of stitches along her shoulder and ribs, but she recovered fully. Bruno had sustained serious injuries, a broken rib and torn muscle along his flank, but survived after surgery and several weeks of recovery. His actions had drawn the bear away long enough to save lives, and he was later honored with a department commendation. Wildlife specialists concluded the bear had likely been resting in the area for days, disturbed by the sudden human presence during the manhunt. There was no indication it had been aggressive before the encounter, only defensive, reacting to surprise. No additional sightings or incidents were reported in the region that season. Once the helicopter lifted off, silence closed back around the forest. The tree stand was left behind, a quiet marker of what had taken place. Weeks later, the officers returned to duty, scarred but undeterred, bearing the memory of a moment when the boundary between predator and protector disappeared in the wild.
76-year-old Margaret Dawson had spent the last 20 years in the same small wooden cabin tucked deep into the woods near a provincial park between Georgian Bay and the Ottawa River, Ontario, Canada, where she had built a quiet life after the death of her husband. She had always been independent, unwilling to trade the solitude of the wilderness for the comforts of city living, and even in her old age, she managed well enough on her own. Her days were simple. She tended to her small vegetable garden, collected firewood, and read by the window as the sun dipped below the trees. Black bears were familiar in the area. They often visited her property, sniffing around her compost pile or rummaging through the undergrowth. However, they had never given her reason to fear them. She had always believed that if left alone, they would do the same in return. But she was wrong. That evening, the air was thick with the lingering scent of the stew she had cooked for dinner, the rich aroma drifting through the open doorway. Margaret had left the door ajar, as she often did, enjoying the fresh breeze that carried the sounds of rustling leaves and distant owls into her home. She had never worried about wild animals venturing too close. After all, she had spent decades living alongside them without incident. She cleared her plate, rinsed her hands in the sink, and moved toward the living room, unaware that something hungry was moving through the trees just beyond the reach of the porch light, drawn by the scent of food. By the time she noticed the animal, it was already inside. The black bear stood just a few feet away, its dark fur blending into the shadows. It sniffed the air, its nose twitching as it searched for the source of the scent that had lured it in. For a moment, Margaret froze, her mind struggling to process the reality of the situation. She had never imagined a bear would enter her home. Her first instinct was to make herself big, wave her arms, shout, or do anything to startle it into retreating. But as she moved, the bear did not hesitate. The animal lunged forward, its weight knocking her off balance and sending her crashing to the wooden floor. It was on her before Margaret could scramble away, its massive paw slamming down against her shoulder, pinning her in place. Terrifying claws raked across her skin, tearing through the thin fabric of her sweater, the heat of her blood spreading beneath her. She struggled, kicking against the floor, trying to free herself, but she was a frail old woman, and the bear was young and hungry. The sound of her heartbeat roared in her ears as the bear lowered its head, its jaws clamping down onto her arm with a terrible force. She heard the bone snap a second before she felt the pain. It began to drag her, its powerful muscles pulling her toward the open doorway. The rough wooden floor scraped against her back as she fought against the inevitable, her free hand clawing at anything she could grasp, chair legs, the edge of a rug, the door frame. But nothing stopped her from being pulled outside. Her breath came in ragged gasps as the bear yanked her down the porch steps. Her body thudded against the ground. She could feel gravel digging into her skin as she was dragged across the yard. The night air was cold against her bloodied skin, but the pain drowned out everything else. The weight of the animal crushed her, its heavy body pressing down against her chest as it tore into her flesh, its claws slicing deep, its teeth snapping bones as if they were nothing. Her screams echoed through the trees, but no one was nearby. The bear would not leave until it had taken what it needed, and it needed to feed. Margaret's struggles weakened, her body trembling from shock, her strength fading as her blood seeped into the dirt. Somewhere in the darkness, the sounds of the forest continued as they always had. The distant hoot of an owl, the rustling of wind through the trees, the chirp of insects oblivious to the violence unfolding beneath them. The world did not stop for her suffering, and no one came to rescue her. By the time the sun rose, casting golden light through the trees, the yard was silent. The only signs of the night's horror left in the blood-stained ground, and the torn remains of Margaret Dawson's clothing. Her body lay twisted among the fallen leaves, almost unrecognizable. The early morning air still carried the faint metallic scent of death. It was not until mid-morning that someone found her. Her nearest neighbor, a man who lived nearly half a mile away, had stopped by to check on her after noticing the back door swinging open, an unusual sight. As he stepped onto the property, the silence felt wrong, heavy, as if the air carried the weight of something terrible. His eyes scanned the yard, searching for movement, for any sign of Margaret, but his breath caught in his throat when he finally saw her. The sight of her battered, lifeless body sent a cold dread through him, his stomach twisting as he took an unsteady step back. The deep gashes that marred her flesh, the unmistakable bite marks, the blood-soaked ground, all of it told the story before he even had time to process it fully. The attack shocked the small community. Black bears had always been a part of life in these woods, but fatal attacks were rare, especially deep in human territory. Officials arrived to investigate, and their warnings about securing homes and keeping food properly stored felt hollow after what had happened. Some argued that the bears were not to blame, that their numbers had grown too large while their habitats had shrunk, forcing them closer to human settlements in search of food. They believed more encounters like this one were becoming inevitable. Others whispered that Margaret had been too trusting and had made a mistake in leaving her door open. Margaret's cabin stood empty, her back door locked, and her once warm home was now another reminder of the dangers lurking in the wilderness.
The wind howled along the rugged coastline of a remote Alaskan island, driving cold spray over the churning channel where Daniel and his friend Mark paddled side by side. Both men, in their early 30s, were seasoned outdoorsmen with years of experience navigating harsh terrain. Daniel, lean and independent, often ventured out alone, while Mark, more methodical and physically broader, was equally skilled, especially on the water. They had planned a short expedition along the island's forested edges with the intention of setting up separate camps for the night. Each sought the solitude that only the wild could offer, and the island, remote and sparsely traveled, offered that in abundance. As dusk approached, Daniel pulled his kayak onto a narrow, secluded beach nestled within a rocky cove. The surrounding shoreline was thick with evergreens, mossy undergrowth, and fallen logs, an ideal spot for a quiet overnight stay. He set up camp quickly, pitching his tent near the forest's edge. Confident in his surroundings and experience, he placed his food bag close to his tent, not secured or elevated, assuming that so close to the shoreline, wildlife wouldn't pose a problem. Across the inlet, Mark continued searching for his own camp location. He saw the faint flicker of Daniel's fire through the trees before nightfall swallowed the landscape. As the sky dimmed and wind picked up, Mark busied himself with his own preparations, unaware that something was already moving in the forest near Daniel's camp. Hours passed. The rhythmic sounds of waves breaking and seabirds calling became background noise until they were shattered by a scream, sharp, raw, and unmistakable. It carried across the water like a siren, then cut off just as suddenly. Mark's blood ran cold. His instincts flared, and he immediately left his camp behind, sprinting toward the sound with only a flashlight and radio. The forest between him and Daniel's site was dense and uneven, thick with tangled roots, damp moss, and hidden obstacles. He moved quickly but clumsily, driven by urgency. When Mark burst onto Daniel's beach, what he saw froze him in place. A massive Kodiak bear stood near the shoreline, its thick coat damp and glistening in the dim light. Between its jaws, it gripped Daniel's overturned kayak, dragging it inland with terrifying ease. Its strength was unnerving, effortless, even as waves pounded the shore behind it. Mark acted on instinct. He shouted, waved his flashlight, and hurled rocks, trying to distract or drive off the animal. The bear paused, dropped the kayak, and turned sharply. It charged without hesitation. Mark stumbled backward, narrowly avoiding a fall, his heartbeat thunderous in his ears. He retreated behind driftwood and brush, managing to call the nearest ranger station. His voice, though shaking, was coherent enough to describe what he had seen and give their location. The bear, after a few tense moments, turned again and vanished into the trees. The crashing of undergrowth and the snapping of branches echoed long after it had disappeared. When rangers arrived by boat just under an hour later, they searched the area cautiously. They found signs of the bear's movement, deep tracks, claw marks on nearby trees, and most grimly, streaks in the sand and moss that led toward the tree line. There, beneath a tangle of broken limbs and forest debris, they found Daniel. The damage was immediate and devastating. His kayak lay nearby, splintered and deformed. Investigators later confirmed that the attack had been swift and overpowering, leaving no time to react or escape. Daniel had suffered severe trauma during the initial moments of the encounter. Over the next 2 days, wildlife officials tracked the bear through the dense terrain. Deep prints in the mud, fresh scratches, and displaced brush revealed its path. Eventually, they found the animal caught in an illegal snare, an improvised trap likely left for smaller game. The bear, injured and unable to free itself, was in a highly agitated state. For the safety of the team and surrounding communities, officials made the decision to euthanize the animal. An investigation revealed several contributing factors. Daniel's unsecured food bag had likely drawn the bear to his camp. More critically, the site he had chosen was located near a well-used wildlife corridor, an area where bears routinely moved between forest and shoreline. Notices had been circulated earlier in the season, warning of bear activity in the region, but it appeared the danger had been underestimated. Mark's quick response and clear communication helped contain the situation and initiate a swift response. But the emotional weight of the moment, seeing the signs, hearing the sounds, and knowing what had unfolded, left a lasting impact. The wild, it turned out, had little regard for experience or preparation when a single decision tipped the balance. Daniel's body was respectfully recovered and transported to the mainland, where friends and family gathered to honor a man who had devoted much of his life to exploring remote places. His loss reverberated through the local outdoor community, prompting renewed discussions about backcountry safety and the unforgiving realities of nature. In the days that followed, the beach grew quiet again. Fewer visitors passed through, and those who did moved more cautiously. Rangers reinforced the need for proper food storage and wildlife awareness. Daniel's story was told in ranger cabins and trailhead briefings, a stark reminder of how quickly control can dissolve in the wild. There were no headlines or viral videos, only a weather-worn memorial stone left by a friend, small, smooth, and placed at the edge of the forest. Nature, unbothered, continued on. The wind still swept the shoreline, the waves still broke against the rock, and the cove returned to silence. But for those who heard what happened there, the lesson was clear. The wilderness offers beauty, but it demands respect. One overlooked precaution, one misstep, can turn solitude into tragedy.
Deep in the wilderness of Alaska's interior, far beyond the reach of roads and human noise, Peter Griggs lived a life of solitude and survival dictated by the land. At 50 years old, he had spent decades as a trapper, his hands worn and weathered from skinning hides, setting traps and hauling furs through frozen forests. He knew the rhythms of the wild and the importance of respecting the predators that roamed these unforgiving lands. However, experience was not always enough to keep a man safe, not when nature decided to remind him just how small and fragile he truly was. One evening, Peter returned to his cabin after checking the last of his trap lines, his sled loaded with pelts. He was tired and hungry. Snow clung to his heavy boots as he stomped through the doorway, kicking the door shut behind him, eager to put a warm meal in his stomach before the cold night settled in. His cabin was small but sturdy, a single-room structure with thick logs stacked against the biting wind. A cast-iron stove was in the corner, a cot against the far wall, and shelves lined with supplies. It was not the comfort Peter lived for, but function, survival, and the bare necessities that kept him alive in a land where a single mistake could mean death. He moved through his routine efficiently, hanging his rifle by the door, shrugging off his thick coat, and setting a pot of stew to simmer over the stove. The rich scent of cooked meat and spices filled the cabin, mingling with the fire's smoky warmth. For a brief moment, he allowed himself the luxury of quiet satisfaction, of the simple pleasure of food after a long day. But outside, in the darkness beyond the flickering glow of his cabin, something had already caught the scent of his meal, something that did not care for man's rules. The first sign was the faint rustle outside, a sound too heavy to be a smaller animal, Then came the slow, scraping noise against the wooden walls, a dragging movement, as if something was testing the structure, searching for a way inside. Peter's body tensed immediately, instincts kicking in, his mind sharpening with the recognition of a threat. He turned toward the window just in time to see the enormous head of a grizzly bear pushing through the frame, its powerful shoulders forcing the opening wider, splintering the wooden edges as it hauled its bulk inside. The moment he moved, the bear lunged. It happened fast, faster than any man could react, way before his body could register the sheer enormity of the danger before him. 1 second he was reaching for the rifle, and the next, the bear's massive paw swiped across the room, sending him crashing into the table and the impact rattling the cabin walls. Pain shot through his ribs as he hit the ground. The bear did not stop. It came at him with fury, its heavy body slamming against the furniture, its claws carving deep gouges into the wooden floor as it advanced. Peter scrambled backward, his boots slipping against the floorboards. His mind raced for a plan. Could he come up with anything that could give him a chance? His rifle was out of reach. He had a knife strapped to his belt, but against something this massive, this relentless, a blade was little more than a desperate man's last stand. The bear lunged again, its jaws snapping inches from Peter's face, its breath hot and rank with raw flesh and decay scent. He barely managed to twist away, the claws tearing into his shoulder. Blood ran warm down his arm, his fingers numb as he fumbled for the knife. His grip was weak, and the pain made it hard for him to see. Peter lashed out with little strength, the blade striking the bear's thick fur, cutting deep but not deep enough. The beast roared, a sound so raw it rattled his bones, and then it struck again, its massive paw crashing down and pinning the man to the floor. The weight of the creature crushed him, and his ribs bent under the pressure. This was it. This was the end. Darkness swam at the edges of Peter's vision, the pain dulling, fading, his limbs growing heavy as his strength drained away. The bear's snarling face loomed above him, and it was the last thing he saw before everything went black. When the hunter found him the next morning, the cabin was silent, the air thick with the coppery scent of blood, the floorboards slick with it. The door stood wide open, snow drifted inside, and the wind whistled through the broken window. Peter's body lay in the center of the room, torn and lifeless, his knife still clutched in his stiffening fingers. The bear was gone, vanished into the endless expanse of the wild. The local community of trappers and hunters spoke of Peter Griggs with the respect reserved for men who had lived and died by the rules of the wilderness. Men who knew that every day in bear country was a gamble, that no amount of experience, no years spent reading tracks and learning the habits of the creatures that roamed these lands could ever guarantee survival.
Beartooth Mountains rose jagged and wild, their rocky spires carving sharp silhouettes against the endless Montana sky. In this remote and unforgiving wilderness, a narrow dirt road wound its way through dense spruce and fir, a fragile ribbon of progress etched into an untamed land. Along its edge, a small construction crew was hard at work, clearing brush, leveling earth, and laying gravel to extend the rugged access route deeper into the forest. Jake, the site foreman, was a seasoned man in his early 40s, with a sun-browned face and calloused hands that bore the marks of years spent working outdoors. His steady leadership and calm under pressure had earned the respect of everyone on the project. Morgan, a tough and sharp-minded woman in her mid-20s, managed the surveying and logistics with fierce precision and steady nerves. Luis, a stocky, practical newcomer in his 30s, had already gained a reputation for his watchful habits, most notably his tendency to carry a fire extinguisher everywhere, a nod to the unpredictable dangers that came with working in deep wilderness. Grizzly bears were a known hazard in the area. Their tracks and signs were seen frequently along the road margins and near temporary camps. Warning posters had been placed at staging points and trailheads, reminding everyone to stay vigilant. But no one expected a bear to crash directly through their trailer during lunch. At midday, the crew had gathered inside the site trailer, a temporary structure with thin metal walls mounted on a plywood base. The door rattled when the wind kicked up, and the inside smelled faintly of sawdust and sweat. Folding chairs surrounded a table cluttered with sandwich wrappers and water bottles. Jake, Morgan, and Luis were seated inside, eating quietly and recovering from the strenuous morning shift. Without warning, the trailer's door exploded inward in a thunderous crash. Wood splintered, metal buckled, dust filled the small space. A massive grizzly bear burst through the entrance in a blur of fur and fury. Its dark coat was streaked with dirt, its muscles rippling beneath the hide, and its wild eyes scanned the room with primal intensity. Morgan, seated closest to the door, had no time to react. The bear slammed into her, knocking her to the floor with devastating force. The breath was driven from her lungs as its claws tore across her back, slicing through her jacket and flesh. Pain seared down her spine. She struggled beneath its weight, each movement more desperate than the last. Luis moved without hesitation. He grabbed the fire extinguisher he had left near the doorway, a precaution that now made all the difference. He discharged a plume of dry chemical directly into the bear's face. The powder cloud engulfed the animal, and it recoiled in rage, bellowing so loudly the walls seemed to vibrate. In a final swipe before retreating, the bear lashed out, its claws raking deep wounds across Luis's side. Jake reacted with equal urgency. Heart pounding, he grabbed a folding table and shoved it into the ruined doorway, jamming it between the twisted metal to form a crude barrier. The bear lunged again, its jaws snapping within inches of his face. Jake held his ground, the table groaning under the pressure as the bear slammed into it, snarling and thrashing with astonishing force. The trailer trembled. Metal siding tore away in jagged strips, the air filled with the sharp scent of blood, dust, and adrenaline. Screws popped loose, bits of insulation fell like snow. Morgan gasped on the floor, pain radiating from her shoulder and back. Her arm was fractured, and her breathing was shallow. She fought to stay conscious, her fingers twitching against the grit-covered floor. Luis, bleeding and shaken, stayed on his feet. Every instinct told him to run, but he kept the extinguisher raised, watching the bear through the haze, ready to strike again if it surged forward. The bear continued to attack, hammering the table, roaring with fury. Its immense weight pressed against the barrier. Its claws gouged deep marks in the wall, and its breath steamed in the cold air. Time stretched and warped in the chaos. And then, as suddenly as it had come, the bear relented. It backed away, let out a final guttural growl, and vanished into the trees. The aftermath was thick with silence. Not even the birds called. The only sound was the wheezing breaths of the 3 crew members and the soft creak of the damaged trailer settling in the wind. Within an hour, wildlife officers arrived by utility vehicle, their expressions grave as they surveyed the scene. The bear had vanished into the timber, but claw marks, torn metal, and blood-smeared surfaces told the story clearly. Medical teams treated Morgan's injuries on site before evacuating her. Her arm was immobilized and the lacerations on her back were stabilized. Luis's wounds were deep but not life-threatening. He was bandaged and kept alert while awaiting transport. Jake, though uninjured physically, bore the full emotional weight of the attack. He had fought to keep the bear out and his crew alive, but the sheer force of the encounter had left him shaken. Wildlife officials later confirmed that the bear had been seen scavenging from improperly stored food caches in the days prior. It had grown emboldened, food-conditioned and aggressive. Its behavior was no longer typical of wild grizzlies, and it posed an immediate danger to humans in the area. The project was halted indefinitely. Crews were evacuated. The forest reclaimed the worksite almost overnight. Machines stood idle under tarps, and the trailer remained behind, dented and scarred, a reminder of what had happened. For Jake, Morgan, and Luis, the wounds would eventually heal. But the fear and awe they'd felt in that moment, inches from something so immense, so unpredictable, would linger far longer. The balance between humans and wild places had tipped, however briefly, and it left a mark. In this part of the wilderness, the rules of survival were simple but absolute. Stay alert, show respect, and never underestimate what lives beyond the tree line.
It hung like a curtain across the Montana wilderness, thick with smoke and ash as the wildfire crept along the dry ridge. It was July 2024, and weeks without rain had left the land brittle and volatile. A Type 2 fire crew, hardened by back-to-back deployments across the West, was deep in the backcountry, working the northern containment line of a fast-moving blaze. Among them were Marcus Hill, 28, a strong and determined rookie, and Ethan Reyes, 43, a seasoned veteran with over 2 decades on the line. Their unit had been cutting fire breaks since dawn, the air choked with haze, chainsaws whining in the distance. The fire hadn't yet reached their position, but wind shifts had made the crew nervous, and every man and woman on the line knew how fast things could change. What they didn't expect was what came from the forest instead of the fire. The team had paused near a clearing, taking a quick break to hydrate and adjust their gear. The nearby trees were scorched in places, needles brown from radiant heat. Their packs lay in a shaded patch beneath a stand of pine, where the scent of sweat, fuel, and dried rations hung thick. Unbeknownst to them, that scent had drifted far into the trees. From the other side of the timberline, a grizzly bear had caught the smell hours ago. Hunger had gnawed at it for days. Rivers had dried up, berries withered, and few carcasses remained. Fire had pushed prey animals into deeper, inaccessible areas, and the bear had wandered into scorched terrain, searching desperately. The smell of food, sweat-soaked clothes, opened ration packs, and scraps of jerky drew it in, and when it stumbled upon the crew's scent trail, it followed it silently. Marcus was crouched near the gear pile, checking the straps on his Pulaski, when the bear appeared. There was no warning growl, no noise of snapping branches, just an explosion of motion as the grizzly tore from the tree line, a blur of muscle, fur, and desperation. The sound of its charge hit first, a pounding rhythm like boulders falling through the woods. The crew froze. Marcus turned just in time to see the bear closing the final 10 yards. Before he could reach for the bear spray at his side, it crashed into him with bone-breaking force, knocking him backward onto the rocky ground. Teeth sank into his forearm as he threw it up to protect his face. The bear bit down, twisting violently, puncturing deep through flesh and muscle. Marcus screamed, legs kicking as he tried to free himself. The bear's claws raked his shoulder and ribs, tearing through fire-resistant fabric like paper. Ethan reacted without hesitation. He grabbed the nearest tool, a flat shovel used for cutting brakes, and charged forward. He slammed the shovel down on the bear's back, the metal ringing out as it struck. The bear reared slightly, distracted, giving Ethan just enough time to pull the bear spray from his belt and fire a concentrated stream directly into its face. The chemical cloud hit the grizzly square between the eyes. It roared in fury and spun toward Ethan, claws raised. It lunged, swiping with blinding speed, and caught Ethan across the thigh, knocking him sideways. The claws ripped through his pants and cut into flesh, sending pain jolting up through his hip. Ethan hit the ground hard, but the other crew members were already shouting, throwing rocks, and brandishing tools. One struck the bear on the haunch with a fire rake. The shouts grew louder, more aggressive. The bear shook its head violently, eyes watering from the spray, breath coming in short, angry huffs. Blood stained its chest and paws, not its own. But finally, overwhelmed by the noise and pain, it backed away. Step by step, it retreated into the woods, snarling low as it disappeared into the smoke-shrouded trees. The crew rushed to Marcus. He was conscious, his face pale and soaked in sweat, blood dripping steadily from his torn arm. His glove had been shredded, bone exposed beneath ripped muscle. Ethan, breathing hard, leaned against a stump, one leg trembling and streaked with blood from several deep cuts. The radio crackled as the crew called in a medevac. They stabilized Marcus's arm with a splint and wrapped Ethan's leg tightly to slow the bleeding. Every minute felt stretched thin by adrenaline. The helicopter arrived 20 minutes later, rotors chopping through the smoke as it hovered above a nearby clearing. Both men were airlifted out, strapped tightly to gurneys, and flown to a hospital on the outskirts of Missoula. Marcus required emergency surgery to repair the tendons and arteries in his forearm. Dozens of stitches and weeks of rehab followed. Ethan's wounds, though less severe, also required stitches and physical therapy for the deep tissue damage in his thigh. Wildlife officials later examined the scene and found fresh tracks, signs of foraging, and partially burned animal trails, all indicators that the bear had been forced into unfamiliar territory by both drought and fire. The proximity of human food, no matter how minor, had triggered the fatal combination of hunger and aggression. They concluded it was a classic stress-driven encounter, a desperate animal, a distracted crew, and too little time to react. The crew returned to the fire line days later, shaken but hardened by what they'd survived. Marcus couldn't return immediately, but his resolve never faded. Ethan resumed duty after stitches and rest, walking with a slight limp, the scars a reminder of how quickly the forest can turn. For many, wildfires are a test of endurance and strength. But out in grizzly country, they bring more than heat and flame. The wilderness does not burn alone. It breathes, it moves, and sometimes it charges.
Mountains rose steep and silent, their ridgelines fading into mist beneath a darkening sky. Emma had come to this remote stretch of forest seeking solitude, a break from the noise and stress of her everyday life. An experienced camper, she had spent countless nights under open skies, but this trip was different. She was entirely alone, miles from the nearest trailhead, her camp set beside a fast-moving creek flanked by towering evergreens and stillness. As dusk settled over the landscape, the forest quieted. The birds fell silent. The breeze softened into a hush. Emma moved quickly, staking down her small tent with fingers stiff from cold. The scent of pine, damp earth, and moss filled the air. A modest campfire crackled nearby, casting dancing shadows across the clearing as she warmed her hands and enjoyed a rare moment of peace. That quiet shattered in an instant. A violent crashing erupted from the underbrush, branches snapping, brush parting. And then a dark shape burst through the trees. It moved too fast to register clearly, but its size and speed left no doubt. It was a bear. A black bear charged into the clearing, its eyes fixed, mouth open, and body low with terrifying momentum. It closed the distance in seconds. Emma barely had time to react before it collided with her, knocking her backward into a fallen log. The impact left her winded, pain radiating through her ribs as she hit the ground hard. The bear loomed over her, claws swiping with startling force. Her jacket tore, pain slicing down her side and shoulder. The air filled with the growl of the animal and the raw scrape of claws against fabric and skin. Her breath came in short, panicked bursts, each one sharp with pain. But beneath the shock, something deeper stirred. The will to survive. Emma fumbled with one hand toward her belt, where she kept a small utility knife. Blood and dirt coated her fingers, but she found the handle and pulled it free. As the bear lunged again, she struck upward, the blade grazing its snout. The animal recoiled, snarling and shaking its head, but it didn't run. Instead, it bit down on her forearm. The pressure was immense. Emma felt herself lifted, then slammed into the earth again, the pain overwhelming. For a moment, everything faded, just cold, noise, and disorientation. But she wasn't done. Dazed and battered, she forced herself to crawl. The fire was still burning faintly nearby. Inch by inch, she dragged herself through the dirt toward it, pain flaring with each movement. Her jacket clung to open wounds, and her body ached with every breath, but giving up wasn't an option. Near the fire pit, she spotted a thick branch, heavy, solid, within reach. She grabbed it with trembling hands, just as the bear turned back toward her. Its growls were low and deliberate now. The animal advanced. Emma pushed herself up and gripped the stick with both hands. As the bear lunged again, she swung. The wood struck its head with a dull thud. It staggered, confused, but still came forward. She swung again, and again. Each strike came from somewhere deeper than fear, a primal resolve not to be taken. Her arms burned, her chest heaved, but she didn't stop. Eventually, the bear paused. It seemed disoriented, perhaps surprised by her resistance. Then, slowly, it backed away. With one final growl, it turned and vanished into the trees, leaving only broken brush and silence in its wake. Emma collapsed beside the dying fire, her breath ragged, body trembling. Her arm hung limp, blood seeping through torn clothing. The cold settled in, and time began to blur. She faded in and out of consciousness, curled near the fading warmth of the coals. By morning, a search team, dispatched when Emma failed to return on time, arrived on foot. They found her slumped near the fire pit, conscious but barely able to speak. Emergency responders stabilized her at the scene and carried her through the forest to a waiting helicopter. She was flown to the nearest hospital for urgent care. Medical staff confirmed that she had multiple broken ribs, serious puncture wounds across her shoulder and arm, and significant blood loss. The bite injuries had narrowly missed major arteries. She remained hospitalized for days and underwent extensive treatment to prevent infection and begin recovery. Wildlife investigators examined the scene and surrounding forest. They determined the bear was likely a juvenile male, old enough to be independent, but inexperienced and food-conditioned. Reports indicated that other visitors in the region had left unsecured food near unauthorized campsites, gradually teaching the animal to associate humans with easy meals. This change in behavior made the bear more likely to approach and react aggressively to people. Emma's case became a powerful reminder that even one person's carelessness with food in the backcountry can alter wildlife behavior in dangerous ways. Rangers reiterated the importance of proper food storage, maintaining a clean camp, and understanding that even the quietest moments in nature can hide risk. For Emma, the road to recovery would be long. The physical wounds would eventually heal, but the memory of the attack, the speed, the weight of the animal, the look in its eyes, would stay with her far longer. Yet she had survived, and in that survival was a testament to her strength, instincts, and experience. Her story spread quickly through the outdoor community, shared in safety briefings, camping forums, and trailhead signs. Not as a tale of fear, but as a lesson in respect. Wilderness can be beautiful, but it is not tame. Even the most experienced hikers must stay vigilant, make thoughtful choices, and never assume safety simply because the forest seems still. As for the clearing where the fire once burned, it remains quiet now. The trees stand tall and indifferent, but the memory of that night lingers, of an unexpected charge, a desperate defense, and a survivor who refused to surrender.
The air hung thin and sharp over the steep ridgeline, where jagged rocks jutted from the earth like broken teeth. It was early September 2011 in Montana's backcountry, and the sky was a hard, cloudless blue. The mountain rescue team moved in silence, focused and efficient, boots scraping against loose stone as they reached the injured climber, wedged against a granite outcrop.
Sergei Novak, 38, was the lead, an experienced mountaineer with over a decade of wilderness search and rescue missions behind him. Tall, lean, and quiet, Sergei had a steady presence that helped anchor the group. Just behind him was Anna Burke, 31, the team's trauma medic. She was tough, focused, and known for staying calm in the worst conditions. The others, Eli, Tomas, and Will, were skilled and coordinated, all trained to handle both the terrain and the danger that came with working this deep in bear country.
The call had come early that morning. A climber had taken a fall down a loose slope on the eastern face of the ridge, fracturing a leg and possibly injuring his spine. There was no time to wait for air support to arrive directly at the scene. The rescue team hiked up, carrying gear for a roped extraction. They had just secured the climber onto a stretcher when something shifted in the brush 30 yards downhill. At first, it was only a sound, branches snapping under heavy weight. Then a low, warning huff rolled through the trees. Sergei stopped, eyes scanning the dense green just below them, motioning to the others to freeze. The air went still, tension thickening as the team instinctively stepped around the stretcher. Then the bear exploded from the brush, It was a full-grown grizzly, its massive body surging uphill with shocking speed. Dust and pine needles flew as it charged, snarling, its dark eyes locked on the group. They didn't know it yet, but the bear was a mother. Her cubs hidden nearby, and she had interpreted the group's movement as a threat. Anna barely had time to turn before the bear slammed into her, its weight knocking her clean off her feet. She hit the ground hard, and the bear's claws raked down her back with brutal force, tearing through her jacket and cutting deep into her flesh. She screamed, her voice raw and panicked, face pressed against the rock as blood spread across her pack. Sergei acted without hesitation. He grabbed the bear spray from his chest harness, pulled the pin, and stepped forward. The bear turned just as he raised the canister and unleashed the stream directly into its face. The chemical hissed through the air, hitting the bear between the eyes. It roared in fury, backing away with a lurch, its claws flailing blindly. One massive paw swung forward and caught Sergei's arm, tearing through his jacket and slicing into the muscle beneath. He staggered, dropped the can, and nearly fell, the pain flashing white-hot through his body. Tomas and Will started shouting, grabbing nearby rocks and hurling them toward the bear. Eli followed, adding his voice to the chaos. The barrage hit the bear's shoulders and legs, not doing damage but confusing it, forcing it to reconsider the threat. The animal reared up once more, roaring with fury, then dropped to all fours and backed away into the brush, still huffing, watching. The moment it vanished into the trees, Sergei ran to Anna. She was conscious, her breathing shallow but steady, her face pale with pain. Her shirt and pack were shredded, 4 long lacerations running from her shoulder blades down to her lower back. Blood soaked the rocks beneath her, and her hands trembled as she tried to push herself up. Sergei dropped beside her, ignoring the searing pain in his arm. He helped her onto her side carefully while Tomas retrieved the medkit. They cleaned the wounds, packed gauze into the deep cuts, and secured her with a compression wrap. Every movement was careful, practiced, but urgency hung over everything like a storm cloud. They could still hear the bear's huffing growls in the distance, and no one spoke as they repositioned around both the injured climber and Anna. The helicopter, which had been circling, finally arrived after 20 minutes. It couldn't land on the uneven ridge, so a winch line was lowered. Eli and Will signed up, helping to lift the climber first. His leg had swollen badly, but he'd remained quiet throughout the chaos, too shocked to speak. Anna went next, her face tight with pain, eyes fixed on the sky as she rose slowly from the ridge. Sergei went last, his bleeding arm wrapped in duct tape and gauze, jaw clenched against the pain. Back at base, medics rushed them inside. Anna's wounds required over 40 stitches, but no bones had been broken, and her spine was intact. Sergei's arm needed surgery to repair torn tendons. Both would carry the scars for life. Rangers investigated the site the next day and found signs of a small grizzly family nearby, tracks of a female and at least 2 cubs, not far from where the rescue had unfolded. It confirmed what Sergei already suspected. The bear hadn't been hunting or reacting out of bloodlust. It had been defending its young. The team had walked too close to the wrong spot at the wrong time. The official report praised the team's fast reaction and credited Sergei's use of bear spray for preventing a fatality. Anna later said the noise and movement of 5 rescuers working fast, hauling equipment, likely triggered the bear's defensive instincts. They had done everything right, made noise, kept their gear ready, stayed alert. But in the wild, even preparation can't prevent every threat. Weeks later, Sergei returned to the mountains with a wrapped arm and a changed perspective. The wilderness had always demanded respect, but now, for him and his team, that respect carried weight. Every step in bear country was a gamble, every sound in the brush a question. And sometimes, survival depended on what you could do in 10 terrified seconds.
Mia and Eric had spent years immersed in Arctic research, focusing on the fragile ecosystems near a remote archipelago above the Arctic Circle. This frozen expanse, one of the last untouched wildernesses, was a stark, beautiful world of shifting ice and snow, holding vital clues to the planet's changing climate. As field biologists, the pair were well prepared for the extreme cold, isolation, and the presence of one of nature's most formidable predators, the polar bear. They knew the risks well, but no amount of experience could fully prepare them for how quickly the wilderness could turn violent. That morning, the landscape was awash in soft gray light. The sun hung low in the sky, casting long, cold shadows across the ice sheets that stretched to the horizon. The air was sharp and dry, stinging any exposed skin as the wind swept loose snow across the ground. Mia crouched low near a patch of clear ice, carefully extracting a core sample, treating the frozen column as if it were fragile glass. Each layer held centuries of atmospheric history. A few yards away, Eric stood with his back to her, logging data into a weatherproof tablet. The only sounds were the scratch of stylus on screen and the distant whisper of wind. They communicated with brief glances and gestures, a quiet understanding forged through years in extreme environments. Their radios remained silent. Coverage was unreliable in this part of the world, and both were used to working in isolation. Then, a faint noise broke the stillness, a soft crunch from the slope above them. At first, it barely registered, but both Mia and Eric froze, recognizing the sound for what it was, something heavy moving through snow with deliberate steps. From the ridgeline, a shape emerged, white against white. A polar bear, massive and silent, its dark eyes fixed on them. For a moment, it looked more apparition than animal, nearly invisible until it began to move. Then it charged, muscles rippling beneath thick fur, covering ground with terrifying speed. Mia scrambled back, dropping her core tools, heart pounding. She shouted, a sharp, instinctive sound that cut through the wind. Eric turned just as the bear reached him. Its jaws clamped down with staggering force, dragging him down in an explosion of snow and ice. The impact was brutal, the predator's strength overwhelming. Eric thrashed beneath the bear's weight, struggling to break free, but the animal held fast. Acting on adrenaline and training, Mia reached for the flare gun secured to her belt. Her fingers fumbled with frozen buckles. She raised it and fired. Once, then again, sending red flares arching into the sky. The light burst across the ice, startling the bear. It hesitated, turning its head slightly as the brilliance and sound disrupted the attack. But it wasn't enough. The bear swiped at Mia with a massive paw, its claws raking across her leg. She collapsed onto the ice, pain pulsing outward in waves. The cold bit deep as blood seeped through her clothing. Gritting her teeth, she rolled onto her back and fired another flare, then another. Each detonation flared across the frozen expanse, painting the snow in flashes of red. The bear growled, distracted now, confused by the light and noise. It backed away momentarily but didn't flee, its attention shifting between the two injured figures. Then, faint at first but growing louder, came the unmistakable thump of rotor blades. A helicopter, resupply or rescue, was approaching, its sound rolling across the tundra like distant thunder. The bear turned toward the sound, ears back, body tense. With one last glance at Mia and Eric, it turned and retreated, vanishing back into the ridges from which it had come. Mia dragged herself across the ice, each movement a trial. She reached Eric, his parka stained with blood, his eyes fluttering as he clung to consciousness. She checked his breathing, applied pressure where she could, and held on. When the helicopter arrived, rescue personnel acted quickly. Medics stabilized Eric's injuries and secured both researchers for evacuation. Blankets were wrapped tight against the cold. Inside the aircraft, Mia's mind drifted between shock and relief as the white wilderness faded below them. At the hospital, doctors confirmed the seriousness of their injuries. Eric's shoulder and upper torso bore deep punctures and severe bruising. Mia's leg had been torn badly, with additional trauma from the fall. Both would need surgery, physical therapy, and months of recovery. but they had survived. Later analysis revealed what researchers across the Arctic already feared. Polar bear behavior was changing. Melting sea ice and vanishing hunting grounds were pushing them closer to human camps and research stations. With fewer seals to hunt, these apex predators were hungrier and more aggressive, their natural fear of humans increasingly eroded. Mia and Eric's close call sent a wave of concern through the scientific community. In meetings and field reports, their experience became a case study in the growing danger researchers face in the polar regions. Protocols were reviewed. Safety standards were upgraded. Remote alarms, motion sensors, and more powerful deterrents were recommended for all future expeditions. But no technology could replace the fundamental respect required in such a place. For Mia and Eric, the memory of that morning would remain frozen in time, etched in snow, shadow, and the red glow of emergency flares. Their survival was a rare triumph in a place where the line between curiosity and catastrophe is razor thin. And in the silence of the Arctic, that line is shifting.
Sky above Oregon's backcountry glowed pale through the canopy as the late afternoon sun filtered down in slanted golden beams. Sophie Nguyen pedaled hard, her breath steady, muscles burning as she climbed the narrow trail winding through thick fir forest. At 27, she was an experienced rider, lean, strong, and accustomed to riding alone when she needed space. The solitude of the remote trail gave her peace. It also dulled her instincts. She didn't hear it at first. Just the sound of tires crunching over dry pine needles, the rustle of wind in the trees, the occasional snap of a stick beneath her wheels. The trail was remote, tucked far from campsites and far from cell service, the kind of place where you could go for hours without seeing another soul. Her friends were minutes behind, having stopped to adjust gear at the last overlook. Sophie had pushed ahead, enjoying the speed, the rhythm, the quiet. But the quiet ended without warning. A sudden burst of movement shattered the calm. From the dense underbrush on her left, a large black bear erupted into view, its massive body surging forward with terrifying speed. Its dark fur bristled, eyes locked on Sophie's moving form as it broke onto the trail behind her. For a moment, she couldn't comprehend what she was seeing. Her brain tried to deny it. Too close, too fast, too real. Then it charged. The bear galloped with a predatory force, covering ground quickly, claws tearing through undergrowth and dirt. Sophie screamed and leaned hard into the handlebars, trying to accelerate, but the trail twisted suddenly to the right and her front wheel caught on a hidden root. She lost control. Her bike skidded sideways, tires bouncing off rocks, and she flew forward over the handlebars, crashing into the ground with a heavy thud. Pain shot through her arms and legs as she landed hard on her side, skidding across sharp gravel and moss-covered stone. Blood welled from scrapes on her elbows and knees, and her breath caught in her throat as the world tilted violently around her. She turned, vision blurred, and saw the bear barreling closer. Its snout was wet with saliva, nostrils flaring as it inhaled the scent of sweat, blood, and rubber. Its paws hit the trail just yards away. Sophie scrambled, trying to get to her feet, her legs shaking beneath her. She slipped once on loose gravel, then forced herself upright, pain screaming through her limbs. The bear lunged again, its paw swiped low, catching the back of her leg. Thick claws tore through the fabric of her leggings and slashed the skin beneath, shallow but sharp, enough to knock her off balance. She stumbled backward, gasping as her heel hit a rock and she went down again, landing hard. Dirt filled her mouth as she spat and choked, and the bear loomed above her, panting, its breath heavy with wild scent. Every instinct in Sophie screamed at her to run, but she couldn't. Her legs were cut, her arms burning, the bike twisted behind her in the dirt. Then something else took over. She shoved herself up onto her knees, roared with everything in her, and threw her arms wide. She screamed, not a cry of pain, but a sound full of fury and desperation, loud and ragged. The bear flinched, just slightly. Enough to make her scream again, louder, her voice echoing off the trees. She raised both arms, still shouting, slashing at the air with one hand as if to strike. The bear paused, blinked, and stepped backward slowly. Its posture changed. The charge halted, its ears tilted, assessing the noise, confused by the sudden burst of aggression. Sophie kept yelling, staggering to her feet with blood trailing down her shin and forearm. The bear snorted, turned its head slightly, then took another step back. It circled once in place, still watching her, then finally lowered its massive body and backed into the forest, disappearing between the trees as fast as it had arrived. She stood still, panting, heart pounding so violently it felt like it might tear from her chest. The silence that followed felt suffocating. The trail stretched before her, empty. The bear was gone, but her legs still shook and her body throbbed with adrenaline and pain. Then she heard voices. Shouts echoed up the trail, closer than she'd realized. Her friends, Maya and Ben, emerged around the last bend, eyes wide with confusion and fear. They dropped their bikes when they saw her rushing to her side. Her face was scratched, her limbs bleeding, her helmet cracked and crooked on her head. She collapsed to her knees, trembling, and pointed wordlessly to the brush where the bear had vanished. They scanned the trees, but the forest had closed around the path once more, still and undisturbed. They helped her limp back down the trail, keeping watch with every step. It took them nearly an hour to reach the trailhead, where they found a signal and called for help. Sophie's wounds were treated at a local clinic, nothing deep but enough to leave marks. The gash on her leg required stitches, and her arms were badly scraped, but she'd survived. Wildlife officials investigated the following day. They found claw marks along the trail and signs of fresh bear activity, broken saplings, disturbed soil, and deep paw prints crossing the path. It was likely the bear had been foraging nearby and startled by Sophie's sudden approach. They theorized it may have been drawn to the scent of bike grease or tires, both of which had been known to attract curious black bears in the region. They issued warnings and placed new signs along the trail. Bikers were urged to ride in groups, make noise, and avoid storing food or strongly scented items in backpacks. Sophie didn't return to that trail again. The crash, the charge, the moment she met the bear's eyes, all of it stayed with her. But she kept biking, eventually, after the fear dulled and her strength returned. She wore the scars like reminders, not of weakness, but of the moment she found something deeper than fear. The will to stand when everything told her to run.